The morning sun painted the Kentucky countryside in shades of gold and amber as I walked through the familiar gravel path toward the stable. October had always been my favorite month here in Lexington. The leaves were turning, creating a tapestry of reds and oranges that made every sunrise feel like a painting. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of hay and that earthy smell that only comes after a light frost. I could hear the soft nickering of horses in the distance, a sound that had become the soundtrack of my life for the past 15 years. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and at 38, I thought I had everything figured out. I was a professional horse trainer, working at one of the most respected equestrian facilities in central Kentucky. My days were filled with the rhythm of hoofbeats, the gentle sounds of horses breathing, and the satisfaction that comes from building trust with these magnificent creatures. But if I'm being honest, there was one horse that had captured my heart completely, a chestnut thoroughbred named Thunder. Thunder wasn't like the other horses. When I first met him 3 years ago, he was a rescue case, a former racehorse who had been retired early due to a minor injury that ended his racing career. He was skittish, distrustful of humans, and carried himself with the weariness of an animal who had been let down too many times. The facility owner, Mrs. Henderson, had asked me specifically to work with him, knowing my reputation for rehabilitating difficult horses. That October morning started like any other. I remember checking my phone as I walked. 7:23 a.m., a text from my sister in California asking about Thanksgiving plans and a weather alert warning of possible afternoon storms. I slipped the phone back into my jacket pocket and focused on the moment ahead. Thunder would be waiting for me, as he had every morning for the past year since we'd formed our partnership. The stable was quiet, except for the soft movements of horses in their stalls. I could see Thunder's dark eyes watching me as I approached his stall, and as always, my heart swelled with affection for this gentle giant. He was 16.2 hands high, with a coat the color of autumn leaves and a white star on his forehead that made him unmistakable. His ears pricked forward as he heard my footsteps, and I could see the trust in his eyes. Trust that had taken months to build. "Good morning, beautiful," I whispered as I reached out to stroke his neck. His skin was warm and soft, and he leaned into my touch with the contentment of an animal who felt safe. It was a far cry from the nervous, jumpy horse I'd first encountered. Thunder had taught me as much about patience and persistence as I had taught him about trust. Our routine was sacred. First, I'd spend a few minutes just talking to him, my voice low and soothing as I told him about my plans for the day. Then, I'd carefully brush his coat, checking for any cuts or irregularities. Thunder loved this part. He would close his eyes and sometimes rest his head against my shoulder, a gesture of complete trust that never failed to move me. That morning, I was planning to take him on our usual trail ride through the back 40 acres of the property. It was a route we'd taken hundreds of times, winding through patches of forest, along the creek that ran through the eastern edge of the property, and up to the small hill that overlooked the surrounding farmland. It was our time together, away from the training arena, and the watchful eyes of other trainers and students. As I saddled Thunder, I noticed he seemed particularly alert. His ears were constantly moving, listening to sounds I couldn't hear. But this wasn't unusual. Horses are prey animals by nature, always aware of their surroundings. I ran my hand along his neck and spoke softly to him. "Just the usual ride today, boy. Nothing to worry about." By 8:15 a.m., we were heading out toward the trail. The morning was perfect, not too cold, with just enough breeze to keep it comfortable. Thunder's gait was smooth and confident as we made our way past the main training arena where other riders were already beginning their morning sessions. I waved to Jennifer, another trainer who was working with a young mare in the round pen. Everything felt normal, peaceful, exactly as it should be. We entered the tree line and immediately the world became quieter, more intimate. This was where Thunder and I did our best communicating, not through words, but through the subtle shifts in weight, the gentle pressure of my legs against his sides, the way he responded to the slightest movement of the reins. We had developed an almost telepathic connection over the years, each of us anticipating the other's needs and reactions. The trail curved gently downward toward the creek, and I could hear the water running over the rocks. October had been dry, so the creek was lower than usual, but still flowing steadily. Thunder loved this part of the ride. He would often pause to drink from the creek, and sometimes I would dismount and let him graze on the sweet grass that grew along the banks. As we approached the creek crossing, I felt Thunder's body tense slightly beneath me. It was subtle, just a slight change in his stride, but after 3 years together, I had learned to read every nuance of his behavior. I looked around, trying to see what had caught his attention. The forest seemed peaceful. Birds were singing in the trees overhead, and I could see a squirrel racing up an oak tree about 50 yards away. "What is it, Thunder?" I asked softly, my hand moving instinctively to pat his neck. He had stopped walking and was standing perfectly still, his head raised high, nostrils flaring as he tested the air. This was classic horse behavior when they sensed potential danger, but I couldn't see or hear anything that should concern him. That's when I heard it. A low, rumbling sound in the distance, like thunder, but too sustained, too mechanical. It was getting closer, and as it did, I realized what it was. A helicopter, flying low over the forest. Probably a medical helicopter heading to the nearby hospital, I thought. Nothing to be worried about. But Thunder clearly disagreed. His body had gone rigid beneath me, and I could feel his heart rate increasing. As a former racehorse, he had been exposed to crowds and noise, but something about this particular sound was triggering his fight-or-flight response. I gathered the reins a little tighter and spoke to him in the calm, authoritative voice I had learned to use in moments like this. "Easy, boy. It's just a helicopter. Nothing to worry about." But even as I said the words, I could feel my own tension rising. Thunder's anxiety was contagious, and his fear was making me more alert to potential dangers. The helicopter passed overhead, the sound fading as it continued toward the hospital. Thunder remained tense for a few more moments, then gradually began to relax. I felt his muscles ease beneath me, and his breathing returned to normal. Crisis averted, I thought. We had dealt with spooking episodes before, and Thunder had learned to trust my calm reactions. We continued toward the creek, and Thunder seemed to have forgotten about the helicopter. He lowered his head to drink from the clear water, and I took the opportunity to look around at the beautiful autumn morning. The leaves were spectacular this year, and the way the morning light filtered through the canopy created an almost magical atmosphere. It was 8:47 a.m. when everything changed. As we climbed the gentle slope on the other side of the creek, heading toward our usual turnaround point, Thunder suddenly shied violently to the left. I don't know what spooked him. Maybe a deer breaking cover, maybe just a shadow that looked wrong to his prey animal instincts. Whatever it was, his reaction was swift and powerful. In that split second, several things happened simultaneously. Thunder's powerful hindquarters bunched beneath me as he prepared to bolt. I felt myself slipping in the saddle, my weight shifting dangerously to the right as he spun left. I tried to regain my balance, my hands reaching for his mane, but momentum was already working against me. I remember the sensation of falling, the ground rushing up to meet me, and the sickening realization that I was going to hit hard. My last clear thought before impact was a prayer, not for myself, but that Thunder wouldn't get hurt, that he wouldn't step on me as I fell. The world went dark, but even in that terrifying moment of falling, I had no idea that what came next would change everything I thought I knew about loyalty, love, and the extraordinary bond between a human and a horse. Consciousness returned to me slowly, like emerging from deep water. At first, there was only pain, a throbbing in my head that seemed to pulse with my heartbeat, and a sharp, burning sensation along my left side that made breathing difficult. I tried to open my eyes, but the morning sunlight seemed impossibly bright, sending spikes of agony through my skull. I was lying on my back, staring up at the canopy of oak and maple trees overhead. The leaves, so beautiful just moments before, now seemed to mock me with their cheerful autumn colors. How long had I been unconscious? Minutes? Hours? I had no way of knowing. Slowly, carefully, I tried to assess my condition. My head was pounding, and when I tentatively reached up to touch my forehead, my fingers came away sticky with blood. There was a gash somewhere along my hairline, probably from hitting a rock or a branch on the way down. The metallic taste in my mouth told me I had bitten my tongue, and my left shoulder felt like it was on fire. But it was my left leg that scared me the most. I couldn't feel anything below my knee, not pain, not pressure, nothing. When I tried to move it, nothing happened. terror began to creep into my chest, cold and suffocating. In my 15 years of working with horses, I had seen enough riding accidents to know that spinal injuries were always a possibility. Was I paralyzed? Had that one moment of bad luck cost me the use of my legs? I tried to stay calm, to think rationally about my situation. I was alone in the woods, at least half a mile from the main stable. My phone was in my jacket pocket, but when I tried to reach for it, the movement sent such a wave of pain through my shoulder and chest that I nearly blacked out again. Broken ribs, definitely. Maybe a dislocated shoulder. That's when I heard him. A soft nickering sound, gentle and concerned, coming from somewhere near my head. I turned carefully, fighting through the pain and dizziness, and there he was. Thunder stood about 10 feet away, still wearing his saddle and bridle, his reins dragging on the ground. His dark eyes were fixed on me with an expression I had never seen before, deep, almost human concern. "Thunder," I whispered, my voice hoarse and barely audible. "You stayed." He took a step closer, lowering his great head to sniff at me. His breath was warm against my face, and for a moment, the terror I felt began to ebb. I wasn't alone. This magnificent animal, who could have easily bolted for home after dumping me, had chosen to stay. But why? In all my years of training horses, I had never seen behavior quite like this. Horses are flight animals. When something scares them, their instinct is to run first and ask questions later. After throwing a rider, most horses will head straight back to the barn, drawn by the comfort and safety of familiar surroundings. Yet here was Thunder, standing guard over me like some kind of equine sentinel. I tried again to reach my phone, moving slowly and deliberately despite the pain. Each movement was agony, but I managed to work my right hand into my jacket pocket. My fingers found the familiar shape of my iPhone, and I pulled it out with trembling hands. No signal. Of course there was no signal. We were in a dead zone, surrounded by hills and dense forest. The reality of my situation began to sink in. I was badly injured, possibly paralyzed, with no way to call for help. The trail we had taken was one of the less popular routes. It could be hours before anyone came looking for me, and even then, they would have to know where to look. I had told Jennifer I was taking Thunder out for a ride, but I hadn't specified which trail. Panic started to rise in my chest, but then Thunder nickered again, soft and reassuring. He had moved closer, close enough that I could reach out and touch his front leg. The contact grounded me, reminded me that I wasn't completely helpless. This horse, this incredible animal, had made a choice to stay with me. The least I could do was try to stay calm and think clearly. I began to take inventory of my injuries more systematically. My head injury was bleeding, but it didn't seem to be gushing. Head wounds always looked worse than they were because of the rich blood supply to the scalp. My left shoulder was definitely dislocated or broken, and I could feel at least 2 broken ribs on my left side. But it was my left leg that worried me most. I still couldn't feel anything below the knee, and when I looked down, I could see that my boot was twisted at an unnatural angle. The morning was warming up, but lying on the damp ground was starting to make me cold. I knew that shock was a real danger in a situation like this, and staying warm was crucial, but I couldn't move enough to do anything about it. Every time I tried to shift position, the pain would overwhelm me and threaten to drag me back into unconsciousness. That's when Thunder did something extraordinary. He began to pace in a tight circle around me, never more than 10 or 15 feet away, always keeping me in sight. It was as if he was standing guard, protecting me from whatever dangers might be lurking in the forest. Bears were rare in this part of Kentucky, but there were coyotes, and an injured human lying on the ground would be vulnerable to any number of predators. Around noon, I could tell by the position of the sun overhead, I heard the distant sound of voices. Hope flared in my chest, and I tried to call out, but my voice was too weak to carry far through the trees. Thunder heard them too. His ears pricked forward, and he whinnied, a loud, piercing sound that echoed through the forest. The voices stopped. Then I heard them again, closer this time, and more urgent. Thunder whinnied again, and I realized what he was doing. He was calling for help. This horse, who had every reason to be nervous around strangers, was deliberately drawing attention to our location. "Over here," I managed to croak, putting every ounce of strength I had into the words. "Help!" The voices grew closer, and soon I could hear the sound of people crashing through the underbrush. Then I heard Jennifer's voice calling my name, and relief flooded through me like a warm tide. "Sarah! Sarah, where are you?" "Here," I called back, and thunder whinnied again, as if to say, "She's right here." Jennifer burst through the trees, followed by two of the stable hands, Mike and Tommy. Her face went white when she saw me lying on the ground, but she immediately knelt beside me, her training as a former EMT taking over. "Don't move," she said firmly, her hands already checking my pulse and looking for obvious injuries. "We're going to get you out of here, but we need to be careful." Mike was already on his radio, calling for a medical helicopter, while Tommy tried to approach Thunder to catch him. But Thunder wouldn't let Tommy near his reins. Every time Tommy reached for them, Thunder would step away, always keeping himself between Tommy and me. It was as if he didn't trust anyone else to take care of me. "It's okay, Thunder," I whispered. "These are friends. They're here to help." Jennifer looked at me with amazement. "Sarah, he's been standing over you this whole time?" I nodded weakly. "He never left. He's been guarding me." The next hour was a blur of activity. The medical helicopter arrived and landed in a nearby clearing. The paramedics were professional and gentle, but every movement as they stabilized me and prepared me for transport was excruciating. Through it all, Thunder stood nearby, watching every movement with those intelligent dark eyes. As they loaded me onto the stretcher, I reached out toward Thunder one last time. He stepped forward and gently nuzzled my outstretched hand, his breath warm against my palm. "Take care of him," I whispered to Jennifer as the paramedics carried me toward the helicopter. "He saved my life." As the helicopter lifted off, I caught one last glimpse of Thunder through the window. He was standing in the clearing, his head raised high, watching us disappear into the distance. Even through my pain and fear about what the future might hold, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. This horse, this incredible animal, had chosen to stay with me when he could have run. He had called for help when I was too weak to do it myself. But as the landscape blurred beneath us and the hospital grew closer, I had no idea that my recovery would depend not just on the skill of doctors and surgeons, but on the unwavering faith of a horse who refused to give up on me. The surgery took 7 hours. When I finally woke up in the ICU at University of Kentucky Hospital, the first thing I noticed was that I could wiggle my toes. The relief was so overwhelming that I started crying, tears streaming down my face as I stared at the white ceiling tiles above my bed. Dr. Martinez, the orthopedic surgeon who had put me back together, explained that I had been incredibly lucky. The break in my left leg was complex but clean, what he called a spiral fracture of the tibia and fibula that had required multiple titanium plates and screws to repair. My shoulder had been dislocated, not broken, and they had been able to pop it back into place during surgery. The broken ribs would heal on their own, given time. The temporary paralysis was from swelling around your spinal cord, Dr. Martinez explained as he reviewed my x-rays. It was scary, but not permanent. You're going to have a long recovery ahead of you, probably 6 months before you're walking normally. But you will walk again. 6 months. The number felt both enormous and merciful at the same time. I would walk again. I would ride again. Everything else was just details. My sister Amy flew in from California the next day, bringing with her a whirlwind of practical efficiency and emotional support. She had always been the organized one in our family, and within hours of arriving, she had spoken to my insurance company, arranged for extended leave from my job, and somehow convinced the hospital cafeteria to sneak me a decent cup of coffee. But for all her love and support, Amy couldn't answer the question that was eating at me. How was Thunder? Jennifer visited on my 3rd day in the hospital, bringing with her a small bouquet of flowers from the stable's garden and the news I had been desperate to hear. "He's fine, physically," she said, settling into the uncomfortable vinyl chair beside my bed. "No injuries from the accident, but Sarah..." She paused, her expression troubled. "He's not acting right." My heart clenched. "What do you mean?" "He won't let anyone ride him. Hell, he won't let anyone get close enough to put a halter on him. It's like he's reverted back to how he was when he first arrived, skittish, defensive, not trusting anyone. Mrs. Henderson is starting to worry that he might be..." She trailed off, but I knew what she was thinking. "Might be what?" I pressed. "Ruined for riding. If we can't get him to accept a rider again, she might have to make some difficult decisions." The implication was clear. Horses that couldn't be ridden had limited value at a facility like ours. Mrs. Henderson was a practical businesswoman, and while she loved all the horses in her care, she couldn't afford to keep an animal that couldn't earn its keep. "He's not ruined," I said firmly, though my voice was weak from exhaustion. "He's protecting himself the only way he knows how. He's scared." "Of what?" I thought about it for a long moment, staring out the window at the gray October sky. "Of trusting again, of letting someone down. He stayed with me, Jennifer, for hours. He called for help when I couldn't. And then he had to watch strangers take me away, not knowing if he'd ever see me again." Jennifer's eyes softened. "You think he's grieving?" "I think he's confused and scared and probably feeling abandoned. We had a bond, a partnership. From his perspective, our relationship just ended. No explanation, no closure." The conversation stayed with me long after Jennifer left. That night, lying in my hospital bed listening to the beeping of monitors and the quiet conversations of nurses in the hallway, I made a decision. As soon as I was able, I was going back to see Thunder. Whatever it took, however long it took, I was going to rebuild the trust we had shared. My recovery was slower than I had hoped, but faster than the doctors had predicted. The pain was a constant companion for the first few weeks, a dull, throbbing ache in my leg that spiked into sharp agony whenever I moved wrong. Physical therapy was torture disguised as healing, but I pushed through it with the single-minded determination of someone who had a very specific goal in mind. I wanted to ride again. More than that, I wanted to ride Thunder again. Amy stayed for 2 weeks, helping me navigate the transition from hospital to home. I had rented a small apartment in Lexington specifically because it was close to the stable, and now I was grateful for the short commute. Even though I couldn't work yet, I could at least visit. Mrs. Henderson was understanding but cautious when I called to ask about coming to see Thunder. "Sarah, you're still on crutches. Maybe you should wait until you're more mobile." "Mrs. Henderson, with all due respect, I'm not planning to ride him. I just want to see him, to let him know I'm okay." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "The truth is, Sarah, I'm not sure it's safe. He's been aggressive with anyone who tries to approach his stall. Yesterday, he actually tried to bite Tommy when he was bringing feed. This didn't sound like the Thunder I knew, the gentle, trusting horse who would rest his head on my shoulder. Something was seriously wrong, and I was the only one who might be able to help him." 3 weeks after the accident, Amy drove me to the stable for my first visit. It was a cold, gray morning in early November, and the bare trees looked skeletal against the overcast sky. The festive autumn colors had given way to the stark reality of approaching winter. I could hear Thunder before I could see him. As we walked down the stable aisle, the sound of hooves kicking against wood echoed through the building. When we reached his stall, my heart broke. Thunder looked terrible. He had lost weight, his ribs showing through his dull coat. His eyes, once bright and trusting, were wild and wary. The white star on his forehead, always a beacon of his gentle nature, seemed diminished somehow. This wasn't the horse I knew. This was a frightened, angry animal who had given up on humans entirely. He was pacing in his stall, his movements agitated and repetitive. When he saw me, he stopped abruptly, his ears pinned back against his head. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, slowly, his ears came forward slightly, and I saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "Hey, beautiful," I said softly, the same greeting I had used every morning for 3 years. "I'm sorry I've been away so long." Thunder took a step toward the front of his stall, then stopped, as if fighting an internal battle between trust and self-preservation. I could see the conflict in his body language. Part of him wanted to come to me, but he'd been hurt too many times by the absence of someone he loved. I understood that feeling intimately. The fear of hoping for something that might be taken away again. The safety of keeping everyone at a distance rather than risking another heartbreak. "I know," I whispered, leaning against my crutches as close to his stall as I could get. "I know you're scared. I'm scared too." Amy stood behind me, giving us space but ready to pull me away if Thunder showed any signs of aggression. But there was no aggression now, just a deep, painful uncertainty. For 20 minutes, I just talked to him. I told him about the hospital, about the surgery, about the long hours of physical therapy. I told him how grateful I was that he had stayed with me, how his presence had kept me calm and hopeful during the worst moments of my life. I told him that I was coming back, that our partnership wasn't over, that I would never abandon him the way others had. By the time I left that day, Thunder hadn't let me touch him, but he had stopped pacing. He stood quietly at the front of his stall, watching me with those intelligent dark eyes, and I could see him thinking, processing, trying to decide whether it was safe to hope again. It was a start. Over the following weeks, as winter settled over Kentucky and the world outside grew cold and gray, I would return to that stall again and again, slowly rebuilding a bridge of trust that had been shattered by fear and misunderstanding. December in Kentucky can be brutally cold, and this year was no exception. The stable was heated, but there was always a chill in the air that seemed to seep into your bones. I had been visiting Thunder every day for 3 weeks, and progress was measured in the smallest of increments. A ear that stayed forward a little longer, a step closer to the stall door, a moment where he didn't tense up when I spoke. My physical therapy was progressing well. I had graduated from crutches to a walking cane, and the doctors were cautiously optimistic about my recovery timeline. But the real test of my healing wasn't happening in the sterile rooms of the medical center. It was happening in stall number 7, where a traumatized horse was teaching me about patience, persistence, and the fragile nature of trust. "You know, Sarah," Mrs. Henderson said one cold Tuesday morning as we stood outside Thunder's stall, "I've been thinking about what you said, about him grieving." I looked at her questioningly. Mrs. Henderson was a practical woman who had been in the horse business for 40 years. She wasn't prone to anthropomorphizing animals or indulging in sentimental thinking. "I've seen a lot of horses in my time," she continued, "and I've seen them react to trauma in different ways. Some become fearful, some become aggressive, some shut down entirely. But what I'm seeing in Thunder, it's different. It's like he's mourning." She was right. Thunder's behavior wasn't just fear-based anymore. He had stopped the aggressive posturing and the constant pacing. Now he spent most of his time standing quietly in the back corner of his stall, only coming forward when he heard my voice. It was as if he was holding vigil, waiting for something that might never come. "The question is," Mrs. Henderson said, "what are we going to do about it?" That afternoon, I tried something different. Instead of standing outside his stall talking to him, I asked Jennifer to help me get inside. It was risky. Thunder was still unpredictable, and I was far from mobile enough to get out of the way quickly if he decided to charge. But I had a feeling that the physical barrier of the stall door was part of the problem. He needed to know that I was willing to be vulnerable with him, the way he had been vulnerable when he chose to stay with me in the woods. Jennifer was nervous, but she trusted my judgment. "If anything goes wrong, anything, you call out, and I'll get you out of there." I nodded and carefully opened the stall door. Thunder immediately moved to the far corner, his body tense and ready to bolt if I made any threatening moves. I stepped inside, moving slowly and deliberately, and then simply sat down on a hay bale in the corner opposite him. "I'm not going anywhere," I said quietly. "We can just sit here together." For the first 10 minutes, Thunder stood frozen in his corner, watching me with suspicious eyes. But gradually, as I made no move to approach him or demand anything from him, he began to relax. His head lowered slightly, and one back leg cocked in the classic resting position of a comfortable horse. I began to talk to him about everything and nothing: the weather, the other horses in the stable, my physical therapy sessions, my sister's upcoming visit for Christmas. It didn't matter what I said. What mattered was the tone of my voice and the fact that I was simply present with him, asking nothing in return. After an hour, something miraculous happened. Thunder took a step toward me. Just one step, but it was the first time in over a month that he had voluntarily moved closer to a human being. My heart raced, but I forced myself to remain calm and still. "That's a good boy," I whispered. "You're such a good boy." He took another step, then another, until he was standing just out of arm's reach. We looked at each other across that small distance, two beings who had been through trauma together and were trying to find their way back to trust. I slowly extended my hand toward him, palm up, moving so gradually that it took a full minute for my arm to reach its full extension. Thunder watched every millimeter of movement, his nostrils flaring as he tried to read my intentions. Then, with infinite caution, he stretched his neck forward and touched his nose to my palm. The contact lasted only a second before he jerked his head back, but it was enough. Tears spilled down my cheeks as I felt the soft velvet of his muzzle against my skin. We had taken our first step back toward each other. Over the following days, our sessions became a ritual. I would sit in his stall for an hour each afternoon, sometimes talking, sometimes reading aloud from a book, sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence. Thunder gradually became more comfortable with my presence, and the brief touches became longer and more frequent. Christmas came and went with Amy visiting from California, bringing presents and laughter and the chaotic warmth of family. She was amazed by the progress Thunder and I were making, but I could see the concern in her eyes. She worried that I was investing too much of myself in this relationship, that I was making my own recovery dependent on the healing of a traumatized horse. "Sarah," she said one evening as we sat by the fireplace in my apartment, "what happens if he never fully recovers? What happens if he can never be ridden again?" It was a question I had been avoiding, but it was fair. "Then I'll love him anyway," I said simply. "He saved my life, Amy. The least I can do is be there for him now." But deep down, I knew that Thunder's healing and mine were intertwined in ways I was only beginning to understand. Every day that he learned to trust again was a day that I learned to trust again too. Trust in my own resilience, trust in the possibility of recovery, trust in the healing power of unconditional love. January brought a breakthrough. I had been cleared to put weight on my leg without the cane, though I still walked with a pronounced limp that the doctors assured me would fade with time. More importantly, I had been cleared to resume limited work at the stable. No riding yet, but I could help with groundwork and training exercises. The first morning back felt like a homecoming. The familiar sounds and smells of the stable wrapped around me like a warm blanket, and even the other horses seemed to sense that I belonged there. But it was Thunder's reaction that made my heart soar. When he heard my voice in the stable aisle, he whinnied. Not the urgent, distressed call he had used to summon help after my accident, but the soft, welcoming nicker he used to greet me each morning before our rides. It was a sound I had been afraid I might never hear again. "Someone's happy to see you," Jennifer said with a smile as we approached his stall. "He's been listening for your voice every morning." When I opened his stall door, Thunder walked directly to me without hesitation. He rested his great head against my shoulder, and I wrapped my arms around his neck, breathing in the sweet scent of hay and horse that had been such a constant part of my life. We stood there together for a long moment, two survivors taking comfort in each other's presence. "We're going to be okay," I whispered into his mane. "Both of us. We're going to be okay." But as winter began to loosen its grip on Kentucky, and the first hints of spring appeared in the warming air, I knew that our real test was still ahead of us, the moment when we would have to trust each other completely once again. March in Kentucky is a month of promises. The promise of warmer weather, of green grass returning to the pastures, of new life stirring in the warming earth. It was also the month when Dr. Martinez finally cleared me to begin riding again, with restrictions. "Light riding only," he cautioned. "Walking, maybe a little trotting. Nothing that puts too much stress on that leg." I was so excited I could barely contain myself. But as I drove to the stable that first morning with my riding helmet on the passenger seat beside me, a different kind of nervousness began to creep in. It had been 5 months since the accident, 5 months since Thunder and I had trusted each other enough for me to climb onto his back. Would he remember how to carry a rider? More importantly, would he want to? Thunder and I had made tremendous progress over the winter months. He now welcomed my touch, allowed me to groom him, and even seemed to enjoy our daily sessions together. But all of our work had been done on the ground. The question of riding, of that ultimate expression of trust between horse and human, had been carefully avoided by both of us. Mrs. Henderson was waiting for me when I arrived, along with Jennifer and Dr. Sarah Kim, a equine behavioral specialist who had been consulting on Thunder's case. Dr. Kim was a small, quiet woman with kind eyes and an impressive reputation for working with traumatized horses. "We need to take this very slowly," Dr. Kim said, as we walked toward Thunder's stall. "For both of you. The goal today isn't to ride. It's just to see how he reacts to the equipment." Thunder greeted me with his usual soft nicker, but I could see the tension in his body as he noticed the saddle and bridle Jennifer was carrying. His ears flickered between forward and back, and his nostrils flared as he processed the implications of what was happening. "Easy, beautiful," I murmured, running my hands along his neck. "We're not going to do anything you're not ready for." The plan was to start with just the saddle pad, letting Thunder get used to having something on his back again. It sounds simple, but for a horse who had associated being saddled with the traumatic experience of throwing his rider, even this small step was significant. I placed the soft fleece pad on his back, and Thunder immediately tensed. His skin twitched, and he took a step sideways, but he didn't bolt or try to buck it off. I stood beside him, my hand on his neck, talking to him in low, soothing tones. "Good boy, such a good boy. Nothing bad is going to happen." After 10 minutes with the saddle pad, we tried the saddle itself. Thunder's reaction was more pronounced. He spun in a tight circle when he felt the weight on his back, and for a moment I thought he might panic. But then he stopped, breathing hard, and looked at me with those intelligent dark eyes, as if asking, "Are you really going to make me do this?" "Not today," I said softly, removing the saddle immediately. "We have all the time in the world." "Doctor," Kim nodded approvingly. "Excellent. You read his signals perfectly. This is exactly how we build trust, by respecting his boundaries and showing him that you won't push him beyond what he's comfortable with." We repeated this process for 2 weeks. Each day, Thunder tolerated the saddle for a little bit longer before I removed it. Gradually, we added the bridle, then the girth, building up the layers of equipment piece by piece. It was painstakingly slow progress, but it was progress nonetheless. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning in late March. The weather was perfect. Warm sunshine with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of new grass and flowering trees. Thunder had been wearing his full tack for 20 minutes without any signs of stress, and I could see something different in his demeanor. There was an alertness, an anticipation that reminded me of the old Thunder, the horse who had loved our trail rides together. "I think he's ready," Dr. Kim said quietly. "But only if you are." Was I ready? Physically, yes. My leg was strong enough, and my balance had returned. But emotionally, that was more complicated. The last time I had been on Thunder's back, I had ended up broken and bleeding on the forest floor. The logical part of my brain knew that the accident had been a fluke, a combination of circumstances that could happen to any rider on any horse. But logic isn't always stronger than fear. "Sarah," Mrs. Henderson said gently, "you don't have to do this today, or any day for that matter. You've already given Thunder so much." But I knew that wasn't true. Thunder and I had been through something extraordinary together. Trauma, separation, healing, and the slow rebuilding of trust. If our partnership was going to be complete, if we were both going to fully heal from what had happened to us, we needed to take this final step together. "I'm ready," I said, and I realized as I said it that it was true. I led Thunder out to the small outdoor arena where we would have plenty of space and good footing. Jennifer and Dr. Kim positioned themselves nearby, ready to help if needed. Mrs. Henderson stood by the gate, her phone in her hand in case we needed emergency assistance. Thunder stood quietly as I adjusted his girth and checked his bridle one final time. When I turned to face him, preparing to mount, he looked directly at me with an expression I can only describe as curious. It was as if he was asking, "Are we really going to do this?" I put my left foot in the stirrup and slowly shifted my weight, giving Thunder every opportunity to move away if he wasn't comfortable. He stood rock still, his ears forward, waiting. I swung my right leg over and settled gently into the saddle. For a moment, neither of us moved. I could feel Thunder's breathing beneath me, steady and calm. I could feel the familiar sensation of sitting on his back, the connection between rider and horse that I had missed so desperately over the past 5 months. Most of all, I could feel his willingness, his conscious choice to accept me, to trust me, to carry me again. "Walk on," I said softly, pressing my legs gently against his sides. Thunder stepped forward, and it was as if the past 5 months melted away. His movement was smooth and confident, his head carried proudly, his ears pricked forward with interest. We walked once around the arena, then twice, then 3 times. With each step, I felt my confidence returning, and I could sense Thunder's confidence returning as well. "How does it feel?" Dr. Kim called out. "Like coming home," I replied, and it was the absolute truth. We didn't do much that first day, just walking in both directions around the arena, practicing our stops and starts, re-establishing the subtle communication between seat and hands and legs that makes a good partnership. But it was enough, more than enough. When I finally dismounted and removed Thunder's tack, he stood quietly beside me, and I swear I could see satisfaction in his eyes. We had done it. We had taken the leap of faith together and landed safely on the other side. That night, I called Amy to tell her about the ride. "I'm so proud of both of you," she said, and I could hear the emotion in her voice. "You've been through so much together." "We have," I agreed, looking out my apartment window toward the stable where Thunder was settling in for the night. "But I think that's what made us stronger." As April arrived with its explosion of wildflowers and newborn foals, Thunder and I began to rediscover the joy of partnership. But we also discovered that healing isn't a destination. It's a journey that continues with each new day. Spring unfolded across Kentucky like a green carpet, transforming the stark winter landscape into something magical. The trails that had once been the scene of our trauma were now bursting with new life. Dogwood trees blooming white against the darker green of oaks and maples, wildflowers carpeting the forest floor, and the sound of the creek running full and clear with spring rains. By May, Thunder and I had been riding together for 2 months. Our sessions were still conservative, mostly arena work with occasional short trail rides on the safer, more familiar paths. But each day brought new confidence, new trust, new moments of connection that reminded me why I had fallen in love with horses in the first place. Mrs. Henderson had been watching our progress with the keen eye of someone who had spent decades in the horse business. One morning, as I was cooling Thunder down after a particularly good session in the arena, she approached me with a proposition that would change everything. "Sarah," she said, "I want to talk to you about something. Have you ever heard of therapeutic riding?" I had, of course. Therapeutic riding programs used horses to help people with physical, emotional, and cognitive challenges. The movement of the horse provided physical therapy benefits, while the bond between human and horse offered emotional healing that traditional therapy sometimes couldn't reach. "There's a program about an hour from here," Mrs. Henderson continued. "They're looking for experienced horses and trainers to work with veterans who are dealing with PTSD and physical injuries from their service." The woman who runs it, Maria Santos, called me specifically asking if I had any horses who had been through trauma themselves. She thinks they connect better with people who understand what it's like to heal from something difficult. I looked at Thunder, who was standing quietly beside me, his ears forward as if he was listening to our conversation. The idea of using our experience to help others was appealing, but I was also protective of Thunder's progress. We had worked so hard to get to this point. Was I ready to ask him to take on the emotional weight of helping strangers heal? "What would it involve?" I asked. "Maria wants to meet you both. See how Thunder responds to new people in new situations. If it goes well, you would work with their program 1 day a week, helping veterans who are learning to ride as part of their therapy." That weekend, Maria Santos came to evaluate Thunder and me for her program, Heroes and Horses. She was a striking woman in her 40s, with prematurely gray hair and the kind of calm presence that immediately put both horses and humans at ease. She was also a veteran herself, having served 2 tours in Afghanistan before a roadside bomb ended her military career and led her to discover the healing power of horses. "Tell me about your accident," she said as we stood outside Thunder's stall. "Not the medical details. Tell me about what it meant to both of you." I found myself sharing more than I had expected. I told her about the fear, the feeling of helplessness, the way Thunder had chosen to stay with me when every instinct should have told him to run. I told her about the long months of rebuilding trust, the setbacks and breakthroughs, the way we had learned to depend on each other in entirely new ways. "And how is he with strangers now?" Maria asked. "Better than he was," I said honestly, "but still cautious. He needs time to assess new people before he trusts them." Maria nodded. "That's exactly what I'm looking for. The veterans we work with don't need a bomb-proof school horse who trusts everyone immediately. They need a horse who understands that trust is something you earn, something you build slowly and carefully." She asked to see Thunder under saddle, so I tacked him up and rode him through some basic exercises in the arena. Then she asked something that surprised me. Would you mind if I tried to approach him on the ground? I want to see how he reads a stranger. I dismounted and stepped aside, curious to see how Thunder would react. Maria approached slowly, her body language calm and non-threatening. Thunder watched her carefully, his ears forward, but his muscles tense and ready to move away if needed. "Hello, handsome," Maria said softly when she was about 10 feet away. "You're a beautiful boy, aren't you?" Thunder tilted his head slightly, as if considering her words. Then, to my amazement, he took a step toward her. It was tentative, cautious, but it was an invitation. Maria extended her hand, palm up, and waited. After a long moment, Thunder stretched his neck forward and touched her palm with his nose, just as he had done with me that first day in his stall after the accident. "He's perfect," Maria said simply. "When can you start?" Our first day at Heroes and Horses was both nerve-wracking and inspiring. The facility was smaller than Mrs. Henderson's operation, but immaculately maintained, with a covered arena, several outdoor riding rings, and a barn designed specifically for therapeutic work. Everything was built with safety and accessibility in mind. Wide aisles, mounting blocks of different heights, and specially designed equipment for riders with various physical limitations. Maria introduced us to the team, 2 other riding instructors, a physical therapist, and a counselor who specialized in trauma recovery. But it was the veterans themselves who made the biggest impression. There was James, a former Marine who had lost his left leg below the knee to an IED in Iraq. Sarah, an Army medic who struggled with severe PTSD after treating casualties in a field hospital. Michael, a Navy veteran dealing with traumatic brain injury from a training accident. Each of them carried invisible wounds alongside their visible ones, and each of them had found their way to this program as part of their journey toward healing. "The thing about horses," Maria explained as we watched James work with a gentle mare named Belle, "is that they don't judge. They don't care about your scars or your missing limbs or your nightmares. They care about who you are in this moment, right now." Thunder's first session was with Sarah, the former medic. She was tiny, maybe 5 feet tall and barely 100 pounds, but there was a toughness to her that reminded me of coiled steel. She had been working in the program for 3 months, but she was still struggling to trust the horses enough to relax while riding. "This is Thunder," I said, as I led him into the arena where Sarah was waiting. "He's had some trauma of his own, so he understands about taking things slowly." Sarah looked at Thunder with interest. "What kind of trauma?" I told her about the accident, about the months of healing and rebuilding trust. As I talked, I could see something shift in Sarah's expression. The wariness in her eyes softened slightly, replaced by recognition, the look of one survivor seeing another. "Can I touch him?" she asked. I nodded, and Sarah approached Thunder with the same careful attention she had probably used when treating wounded soldiers in the field. Thunder stood still, watching her intently as she ran her hands along his neck and shoulder. "He's trembling," she said softly. "Just a little," I confirmed. "He's nervous about new people, but he wants to trust you. It just takes him a minute to decide if it's safe." Sarah continued her gentle exploration, her hands moving slowly and deliberately as she got acquainted with Thunder's body language. Gradually, his trembling stopped, and he lowered his head slightly, a sign of relaxation and acceptance. "He's brave," Sarah said suddenly. "You can feel it in him. He's scared, but he's choosing to be brave anyway." It was such a perfect description of Thunder, and of Sarah herself, that I felt tears prick my eyes. "Yes," I said simply. "That's exactly what he is." The riding session itself was simple, just basic work at the walk, focusing on balance and confidence. But there was something magical about watching Sarah and Thunder find their rhythm together. 2 beings who had been hurt by life, learning to trust each other one step at a time. After Sarah's session, as I was untacking Thunder, Maria pulled me aside. "That was beautiful to watch," she said. "The way he responded to her, the way she responded to him, that's exactly what this program is about, using the shared experience of healing to create connection." Over the following weeks, Thunder and I settled into a new routine, 3 days a week at Mrs. Henderson's stable, working with the regular riding students and maintaining our own fitness and training. 1 day a week at Heroes and Horses, working with veterans who were fighting their own battles with trust and healing. Each veteran we worked with brought something different to our partnership. James taught Thunder to accept riders who moved differently, who needed extra time and patience to mount and dismount. Michael, with his cognitive challenges, showed us both the importance of clear, simple communication. And Sarah taught us about courage in the face of overwhelming fear. "You know what I love about Thunder?" Sarah said one afternoon, as she was brushing him after a particularly good session. "He doesn't pretend that everything is fine. He's honest about being scared, but he does the right thing anyway." It was a lesson that applied to all of us, horse, veterans, and trainer alike. Healing didn't mean pretending that trauma hadn't happened or that fear wasn't real. It meant acknowledging those things and choosing to move forward anyway, one careful step at a time. As summer settled over Kentucky, with its long, warm days and the sound of cicadas in the evening air, Thunder and I discovered that sometimes the most meaningful journeys are the ones where we help others find their way home to themselves. August brought with it the kind of heat that makes the air shimmer and sends both horses and humans seeking shade by mid-morning. It had been almost a year since the accident that changed everything, and as I groomed Thunder in the relative coolness of the stable before our morning session, I reflected on how far we had both come. The scars were still there, a thin white line along my hairline where I had split my scalp, a slight limp that became more pronounced when it rained, and a titanium plate in my leg that would set off airport metal detectors for the rest of my life. But these physical reminders seemed small compared to the deeper healing that had taken place. Thunder, too, bore his invisible scars, but they had been transformed from sources of fear into badges of survival, proof of resilience. Our work at Heroes and Horses had become one of the most rewarding parts of my life. Over the past 3 months, we had worked with more than a dozen veterans, each one teaching us something new about courage, perseverance, and the healing power of trust. But it was our work with Sarah, the tiny former Army medic, that had created the most profound impact. Sarah had been coming to Heroes and Horses for 6 months now, and her transformation had been remarkable to witness. The hyper-vigilant, anxious woman who had first approached Thunder with trembling hands had evolved into a confident rider who was now helping to train new veterans in the program. But more than that, she had become a friend, someone who understood the journey Thunder and I had taken because she had taken a similar journey herself. "I have something to tell you," Sarah said that morning as she helped me tack up Thunder for our session. "I'm being deployed again." My hands stilled on Thunder's girth. "Deployed?" But I thought, "Not overseas," she said quickly. "Domestic assignment. I'm going to be working at Walter Reed, helping to train the next generation of combat medics. It's a good thing, Sarah, a really good thing, but it means I'll be leaving Kentucky next month." I felt a stab of loss, both for myself and for Thunder. Sarah had become such an important part of our weekly routine, and Thunder had developed a special bond with her that was unlike his relationship with any of the other veterans. "How do you feel about it?" I asked. Sarah was quiet for a moment, running her hands along Thunder's neck. "Scared," she said honestly, "but also excited. A year ago, I couldn't imagine trusting myself to take care of anyone else again. Working with Thunder, learning to trust him, and having him trust me back, it reminded me that I'm stronger than my worst moments." That afternoon's session was bittersweet. Sarah rode Thunder through a complex series of exercises that would have been impossible for her when she first arrived at the program. Her seat was confident, her hands steady, her communication with Thunder clear and effective. Watching them work together, I was struck by how much they had given each other. Sarah had helped Thunder learn to trust again, and Thunder had helped Sarah remember her own strength. After the session, as we were cooling Thunder down, Maria Santos approached us with an unusual request. "Sarah," she said, "I know you're leaving us soon, but I wanted to ask you something. We're planning to expand the Heroes and Horses program, and we're looking for someone to help us develop training protocols for other facilities around the country. Someone who understands both the veteran experience and the horse training side. Would you be interested in consulting with us from Walter Reed?" Sarah's face lit up. "You mean I could help other programs like this one get started?" "More than that," Maria said. "You could help us develop standards for selecting and training horses who have been through trauma themselves. Not every horse is suited for this work, but horses like Thunder, horses who understand what it means to heal, they have something special to offer." As we discussed the possibilities, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The accident that had seemed like such a tragedy was becoming the foundation for something larger, something that could help countless other people and horses find their way back to trust and partnership. 2 weeks later, we held a farewell celebration for Sarah at Heroes and Horses. It was a potluck dinner in the stable courtyard, with veterans from the program, staff members, and several of the therapy horses wandering around looking for treats. Thunder, as usual, was the center of attention, graciously accepting pats and carrots from admirers while keeping one eye on me to make sure I was nearby. "I want to say something," Sarah announced as the evening was winding down. She stood up, her small frame silhouetted against the setting sun, and looked directly at Thunder and me. "When I first came to this program," she said, "I was broken. Not just physically, but spiritually. I had lost faith in my ability to help people, lost faith in my own judgment, lost faith in pretty much everything. Then I met this horse who had been through his own trauma, and this trainer who understood what it meant to rebuild trust from the ground up." She paused, her voice thick with emotion. "Thunder taught me that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and choosing to trust anyway. And Sarah, both Sarahs," she added with a smile, "taught me that healing isn't a destination. It's a daily choice to keep moving forward, even when you don't know what's ahead." The gathering fell silent, except for the soft sounds of horses moving in their stalls and the distant chirping of crickets. Thunder, as if sensing the importance of the moment, walked over to Sarah and gently rested his head against her shoulder, the same gesture of trust and affection he had shown me in his stall during those early days of recovery. "Take care of each other," Sarah whispered, wrapping her arms around Thunder's neck. "You're both heroes, whether you know it or not." September brought a return to our regular routine at Mrs. Henderson's stable, but with a new dimension. Word had spread about Thunder's work in the therapeutic riding program, and we began receiving visitors, other trainers, program directors, and researchers who were interested in learning about trauma-informed horse training. One particularly memorable visit came from Dr. Kim, the equine behaviorist who had helped us through those early days of rebuilding trust. She was working on a research project about the long-term effects of trauma on horses and their ability to form new partnerships. "What I find most interesting about Thunder's case," she said as we watched him work with a new student, "is not just that he recovered from his trauma, but that he's been able to use that experience to help others. It suggests a level of emotional intelligence and empathy that we're only beginning to understand in horses." As the 1-year anniversary of our accident approached, I found myself thinking about circles, how life has a way of bringing us back to where we started, but with new understanding and perspective. The trail where Thunder and I had our accident had been reopened for months, and I had ridden it several times without incident. But I had never returned to the exact spot where I had fallen, where Thunder had chosen to stay with me instead of running home to safety. On a crisp October morning, exactly 1 year after our accident, I decided it was time. Thunder seemed to sense something different about our ride as we headed toward the familiar trail. His ears were pricked forward with interest, and his step was springy and confident. The autumn colors were spectacular again this year, painting the forest in the same brilliant reds and golds that had surrounded us on that terrible and wonderful day. As we approached the creek crossing, I felt my heart rate increase slightly. Thunder felt it too. His step slowed, and he turned his head slightly to look at me, as if asking if I was sure about this. "It's okay, beautiful," I said softly, my hand moving to pat his neck. "We're just visiting." We crossed the creek and climbed the gentle slope on the other side. I knew the exact spot where I had fallen. There was a large oak tree with a distinctive lightning scar that I had noticed as I lay on the ground. When we reached it, I asked Thunder to halt. For a long moment, we simply stood there, surrounded by the beauty of the autumn forest. Birds were singing overhead. The creek was babbling softly in the distance, and the warm October sun was filtering through the canopy of leaves. It was peaceful, beautiful, and completely unthreatening, just as it had been that morning a year ago before everything changed. "This is where it happened," I said aloud, not sure if I was talking to Thunder or to myself or to the universe in general. "This is where we learned what we were really made of." Thunder stood quietly, his ears moving back and forth as he listened to the sounds of the forest. There was no tension in his body, no sign of the trauma that had once made him afraid to trust. He was simply a horse standing in a beautiful place with someone he loved, ready for whatever adventure might come next. I dismounted and stood beside him, my hand resting on his shoulder. Looking around at the peaceful forest, it was hard to believe that this serene place had been the scene of so much pain and fear, but it had also been the birthplace of something beautiful, a partnership forged in crisis and strengthened by the patient work of healing. "Thank you," I whispered, not just to Thunder but to everything that had brought us to this moment. "Thank you for staying. Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for teaching me what real courage looks like." Thunder turned his head and gently nuzzled my shoulder, his breath warm against my neck. In that simple gesture, I felt the completion of a circle, not just the physical return to this place, but the emotional journey from trauma to healing, from fear to trust, from brokenness to wholeness. As we rode home that day, taking the familiar path through the golden autumn afternoon, I thought about all the lives that had been touched by our story. The veterans at Heroes and Horses who were learning to trust again. The other trainers who were incorporating trauma-informed methods into their work. The researchers who were studying the emotional lives of horses with new appreciation for their complexity and resilience. But most of all, I thought about Thunder himself, this magnificent animal who had chosen love over fear, trust over self-preservation, partnership over isolation. He had taught me that healing is not about forgetting the past or pretending that trauma never happened. It's about integrating those experiences into a larger story of resilience and growth, using our scars as sources of strength rather than shame. As we entered the stable yard, Thunder nickered softly, the same welcoming sound he had made every morning for the past year. Mrs. Henderson was waiting for us, a smile on her weathered face as she watched us approach. "Good ride?" she asked. "Perfect," I replied. And it was true. Not because nothing had ever gone wrong, but because we had learned to trust that even when things do go wrong, they can also go right again. We had learned that love, the deep, patient, unconditional love between human and horse, is stronger than fear, more powerful than trauma, and capable of healing wounds that seemed impossibly deep. That night, as I was leaving the stable after feeding Thunder his evening grain, he called to me from his stall, a soft, gentle whinny that had become his way of saying goodnight. I stopped and looked back at him, this horse who had saved my life and allowed me to save his in return. "See you tomorrow, beautiful," I called back. And in that simple exchange, in that promise of tomorrow and the countless tomorrows that would follow, I heard the echo of everything we had learned together. That trust is a choice we make every day, that healing is a journey we take together, and that sometimes the most beautiful friendships are born in the darkest moments, growing stronger with each sunrise until they shine bright enough to light the way for others. Our story had come full circle, but like all the best circles, it was also a spiral, each revolution bringing us higher, deeper, and closer to understanding the profound truth that in saving each other, we had found ourselves.